The outcomes of today's elections will shape the future of President Biden's agenda for the next 2 years.
And while he acknowledged it will be difficult for Democrats to maintain control of the House, the president remains optimistic. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang for more on this. Weijia, good to see you on this very busy day. What's on the president's schedule today?
Not much, Nikki and Scott. In fact, he had his presidential daily brief this morning, which happens every day, of course. But then around 11:30, the White House gave us, the press pool, a lid. And what that means is that we will not expect to see the president for the rest of the day. He has no public events on his schedule either. We know that earlier he taped a radio interview with a host that will be nationally syndicated. But, you know, he's really laying low today. Of course, there are extraordinary circumstances when a lid may be lifted, but as far as we know, we won't see him anymore. We won't hear from him. And I think that is on purpose, right? Because he wants to give people the space, and he's urging them to go out to the polls. He doesn't want to distract from that. So we do expect we will hear from him tomorrow at some point.
The last three presidents to suffer a bruising in the midterm elections, Presidents Trump, Obama, and Bush, gave remarks the next day where they tried to put the results in context. So perhaps that's when we hear from President Biden?
I think so. You know, I think even though, as Nikki mentioned, that he remains optimistic, he has also publicly started to, acknowledge that it is very likely that Democrats will lose the House, which is why the Senate race is so important, because whatever happens today is really going to shape the rest of his presidency. And what we've heard from him in the past, Scott, is that, you know, he's been really frustrated because he believes that the accomplishments that he's already been able to tick off his checklist have not been publicized enough. He has said even in recent days that he doesn't believe people remember all the things that he's been able to do. That could be for a variety of reasons. And perhaps number one is because they are not feeling the economic relief that he and other White House officials continue to tout. So there is a disconnect between, you know, what they are celebrating in terms of everything that they've done for Americans and what Americans are feeling. And so I think he'll try to put that into context as well and try to forge ahead. But he's already sort of given us a glimpse, too, of what's to come if Democrats lose control in Congress. He has said it's going to be a difficult couple years ahead. And he said that he's going to have his veto pen ready, which is really telling about, you know, the kind of gridlock that we will continue to see if Republicans, in fact, take over.
They are preparing for this contingency of a Republican Senate and a Republican House. What changes in the policies or the administration for the next 2 years, if and when that happens?
Well, there is a chance that some of the policies could be repealed that the president has already signed into law. And what's really going to have a huge impact is the way that, you know, that Congress decides to deal with inflation, right? Because Republicans have already voiced their concerns about the spending, whereas that's exactly what President Biden has been relying on to try to give some, quote, breathing room to Americans from coast to coast. And so what's interesting, Scott, is that even though the president has said that the first thing he plans to do is to codify Roe v. Wade, what he has not said is what else is on his agenda. He has instead focused on painting a very different picture between, you know, a Democratic vision and a Republican vision. But in terms of, you know, what else he hopes to accomplish while he's in office, sure, we have, you know, a basic understanding of what he hopes to do. He's talked about voting rights, he's talked about immigration, but we don't know what else is on his formal agenda. And, you know, the concern, as he has mentioned many times, is that Republicans will not only, you know, try to block anything he tries to do, but try to take away the things he has already done. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act, there are measures in place that are supposed to kick in January when it comes to helping people, but those could go away. That's his warning to people today.
We did a moment ago, our viewers saw a video of President Biden out on the campaign trail that in Pennsylvania in that video. Has his time on the campaign trail, do you think, helped or hurt Democratic candidates?
Well, I think that's to be determined, but what's really important to recognize here is the way that he was spending time on the campaign trail. It's not the way that we've seen in the past with former presidents who have had big rallies, who have been trying to, for weeks leading up to Election Day, convince voters to vote for them in that context. Instead, he's been having official events trying again to focus on all the things that he says he's already done to help people and remind people of his accomplishments. Of course, in this last week, he has been stumping. He has been, getting out there, but not in the strongholds. I'm sorry, I should say, but in the strongholds, in Democratic strongholds, not in those highly contested races, because a lot of Democratic candidates have tried to separate themselves from this president's very unpopular approval ratings. And so, whether or not his presence in those, blue states will be enough to turn out the vote, of course, that's what everybody is watching. But it was very strategic that, he decided to go to those friendly spots instead of places where, the Republicans and Democrats are neck and neck.
All right, Weijia, thanks.
Except I should say Pennsylvania. He has spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania, which of course is one of the biggest races that we are watching. So, what I mean is other states like Wisconsin, he hasn't gone to, and so even North Carolina. So I think that, for the most part, he has been going to friendly places.
Yes, Pennsylvania, all eyes on Pennsylvania tonight for sure. Weijia, thanks so much.
Sure.
This